Warren knew that to have the best chance at conversion, you needed to speak in the language of the potential convert. So he began to learn the language of science. He would examine fossils, not just Bible verses. He quoted Darwin, not just Augustine. He promised his students not to try to defend metaphysical absurdities like angels and hellfire. Christianity didn't need fire and brimstone. It could simply state the truth. Nothing is so persuasive as honesty. And God's honest scientific truth was, the Garden of Eden is at the North Pole. Or at least it had been before the flood. Warren's theory began with one true scientific premise. This is true. Billions of years ago, the Earth was much warmer. True. Back then, the North Pole would not have been frozen. It might have been, if not tropical, then at least, maybe, habitable? And as all the paleontologists of Warren's time could confirm, the oldest life forms on Earth seemed to emerge directly out of a primeval paradise. Fantastic creatures at once familiar and mythical, like the woolly mammoth, the dinosaur, and the giant sequoia. Flora and fauna of almost unimagined vigor and luxuriousness. The North Pole must have been a place of abundance and perfection, just as the Garden of Eden should be. Genesis says that Eden contains every tree that is pleasant to the eye or good for food. Warren translated the Bible into science. Eden was the one spot on Earth where the biological conditions are the most favorable. Such a well-watered place would obviously be extremely fertile. Warren populated his Eden with numerous species of trees: beeches, oaks, planes, poplars, walnuts, limes, even a magnolia or two, and especially, a species of giant pine closely related to the sequoia. Some of these red bark evergreens in California grew 400 feet tall and had been found to be almost 2,000 years old. Uncannily straight and stunningly out of scale with the rest of the landscape, the last surviving sequoias are, he said, witnesses of a far-off world, witnesses whose testimony even the most incredulous must accept. If these individual trees could struggle against unfavorable biological conditions to survive for 2 millennia, who shall declare it impossible that the men of the time and place of the origin of the sequoia should have averaged more than 6 feet in stature, or attained an age quite surpassing our 70 years and 10? That's right. Here in the polar paradise, under the electric skies and alongside gigantic trees, there were people. Giant people. Adam and Eve, or Hyperborean Eocene man, as Warren called his first race, must have been of giant stature. He stated this theory over and over again. First, he was cautious. The idea of a giant, long-lived people was by no means scientifically incredible. Then he became a little bolder. So what if the oldest human skeletons known by paleontologists had been of only ordinary size, if not smaller? None of them, Warren pointed out in his own defense, had been found in Arctic regions. And Darwin himself once said, apparently true, plants and shells of the Arctic region are eminently variable. So why not humans? Warren stepped daintily around the question of how exactly his Hyperborean Eocene man had sinned. But there may be a clue in his ideas about the tree of knowledge, the tree on which the forbidden fruit grew. If Warren's tree was a sequoia, which it was, the forbidden knowledge probably didn't involve sex. The sequoia doesn't even have fruit. It just has small winged seed pods. Usually the trees reproduce asexually, regenerating new sequoias out of the roots of old sequoias. Still, whatever Adam and Eve's experiment with evil was, it must have been bad, because God immediately sent down a tsunami of wrath, drowning the polar paradise for eternity. Perhaps it's worth noting that sequoias are famously flood resistant. Not so the giant humans. Those few survivors fled, traumatized, southward toward drier lands. Meanwhile, as the Earth gradually cooled, the floodwaters froze, locking the polar paradise under miles of ice. There was something geometrically satisfying about humanity's peopling the Earth gradually from the north, as if God had cracked an egg on top of the planet, and then slowly the yolk ran down on all sides in wide, equal streams. Warren himself didn't actually think that the Eocene garden, as he called it, would be found when explorers reached the North Pole. At that time, there were a lot of expeditions to the North Pole, but nobody had actually found the real one yet. So there's a lot of speculation as to what it looked like. So he was out there advocating for it. Gotta find it, it's Garden of Eden, it's Garden of Eden. But he didn't actually think that the Garden of Eden would be found, this paradise would be found, when explorers reached the North Pole. But one had to read 433 pages of Paradise Found to realize this. On the last page, before the numerous appendices, Warren writes, "Long lost Eden is found, but its gates are barred against us. Now, as at the beginning of our exile, a sword turns every way to keep the way of the tree of life. Sadder yet, it is Eden no longer. Even could some new Columbus penetrate to the secret center of this wonderland of the ages, he could but hurriedly kneel amid a frozen desolation and, dumb with a nameless awe, let fall a few hot tears above the buried and desolate hearthstone of humanity's earliest and loveliest home." The only comfort that could dry poor Columbus's tears was the closing chapter of the book of Revelation, in which we're shown a glimpse of the paradise that is available to us if we accept the sacrifice of Christ. "Blessed are they that do his commandments, for they may have the right to the tree of life." Follow Jesus in life, and in death you can walk right past those cherubim with the flaming swords. But a dead Eden and the promise of a more perfect afterlife did not satisfy the itch for a living paradise. For those thousands, there were thousands who believed in the polar Eden, and for others, future salvation did not fill in the map. An invisible paradise after death was too remote. And so, despite his best efforts to be the last word on the matter, William Warren actually inspired a whole other generation of Eden seekers. Just as he cited many other sources and experts, these new seekers cited Warren as authoritative backup for other Eden claims which continued to pop up undeterred throughout the late 19th and 20th century. Here are some of them, my favorites. Dr. George C. Allen, a Boston University philologist, took his colleague Warren's word for it that Eden was at the North Pole, but he made one important modification. He claimed that the North Pole moves entirely around the world every 25,000 years. So, quote, "Careful mathematical computation brings the original paradise where Ohio now is." A 3-part newspaper editorial, Garden of Eden, its position on the globe definitely located, explained that California's Santa Clara Valley had all the characteristics of Eden: pristine condition, perfect climate, and the giant sequoia. If Warren was so enthusiastic about the sequoia, the writer notes, why didn't he choose California? In coming so near the truth, it seems strange that the able scientific writer did not receive the true light as to the location of the original home of man. Warren can also not have been happy to find his work praised by Wyoming science fiction novelist Willis George Emerson in the preface to his 1908 novel, The Smoky God. The book claimed to be the true account of a Norwegian fisherman who, in 1829, had fallen through a hole at the North Pole into the interior of the hollow earth, where the Garden of Eden was reachable by monorail. In his carefully prepared volume, Mr. Warren almost stubbed his toe against the real truth, but missed it seemingly by only a hair's breadth. The idea of the hollow earth had been popularized in the 1840s by one John Cleves Sims, who believed you could get access to the inner earth through the openings in the earth's crust at the North Pole. Warren, like most people, thought Sims was crazy. Even Warren's own Methodist colleagues seemed willing to give up on his vision of the perfect polar paradise. They were content to stay in upstate New York. Said Reverend E.D. Ledyard in front of an audience of 5,000, after explaining that God could make a new Eden even more glorious than the first, "In Chautauqua, we see one place where Edenic privileges have been restored. Christ is the central figure here. Through the second Adam, paradise is being regained." But Warren himself never gave up his original theory. He remained utterly evangelically convinced of its veracity and universal utility. That's a quote. "None of its multitudinous converging lines of proof has been successfully assaulted. It has shed a blaze of light into some of the obscurest recesses in the history of human thought. It has solved some of the most hopeless riddles of well-nigh forgotten mythologies. It has shown itself the supreme and inevitable generalization from all the facts of modern knowledge respecting man and the world. It has harmonized the oldest traditions of religion and the latest achievements of science." Thus, it is perhaps no surprise that on his passport application from 1903, he was taking his wife and daughters on a trip to Germany to celebrate his retirement. Warren's own height, notated as 5'6" by the Boston Tribune in 1891, was unaccountably listed as 6'10". And during his paid retirement, after 30 years at Boston University's president, Warren continued to try to win converts. In 1909, as Perry and Cook fought over a patch of ice at the North Pole, Warren sent a copy of the 11th printing of Paradise Found, not reprinted, to a colleague at Union Theological Seminary with a note. It rejoices me to learn that you take interest in ancient cosmology, for it is a study which has been unaccountably neglected. Last Thursday, I started a new graduate class in the subject. Ought not your seminary to have one? That's it. Thanks, guys, for listening. I'd love to take any questions anyone has. Yes.
So, did you have an opportunity to travel to any of these places?
I did. I traveled mostly in the present day section of the book because I wanted to be able to put myself in those scenes. So I went to some of perhaps the less exotic. Ohio, Missouri, Kentucky, far afield. Yeah. That's the next book is the Seychelles. I gotta get there.
Cool. I have a question.
Yes, sunshine.
So, were any of the people that you found and maybe didn't profile, were they women who were looking?
Oh, I really should have. Victoria Woodhull, who many of you guys will have heard, was the first female presidential candidate, and it was 1870 something too. She was adamant that the Garden of Eden could not be found on Earth, and anyone who was looking for it was just absolutely like the biggest idiot ever. She was like, what did she say? If any schoolboy over the age of 12 thinks he can find this, like, he's kidding himself. But she, it was such a big issue at the time that she was still debating it. Like, she gave this whole, something like 16,000 word speech about the Garden of Eden and why it was actually not findable on Earth, but it was in fact a metaphor for the human body. And all of those 4 rivers have to do with, they branch out from the stomach, and one is an intestine or something. She had it all worked out. She really thought it through. But for the most part, and there may be reasons for this, which I would love to understand, but for the most part, these folks who were seeking the Garden of Eden were men. Shocking, I know. No.
Not really.
No, it's not really. After a while, I was not so surprised. Because what you're doing when you find the Garden of Eden is you're sort of like putting your stamp on the whole world. You're saying like, this is, I know how it began, and I'm going to show you. So it was not particularly. How to put this? There were not as many women in the book as I would have liked. That's what I said. Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about your process, like your research and writing?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about this lately because I researched and wrote most of this when I was a student in the MFA program at Columbia for 2 years and then a year of research afterwards. And it really would not have been possible for me without that, because I spent so much time in the library. I mean, it was just piles and piles of reading and trying to sort of sort yourself through it and figure out where the story was and all this. And so it was a very different kind of research and writing than I might do, now when I'm released from academia out into the world. So I did a lot of absorbing of information, because I really did start from I was an undergraduate religion major, but I never read the Bible or anything, and didn't have to in my undergraduate religion classes. So I was really kind of starting from zero, and I tried to educate myself by total immersion, which is great, but it's also sort of like cramming for an exam that then the first chapter is this one guy, and the second chapter is somebody totally different. So it was a lot of absorbing information and trying to sort of take a story out of that, and then revising.